Alright, class, big up on yourself. You know, we're here at the end of the actual book, and we're basically wrapping up the school year, so at least we get to finish the book for the end of the school year. I didn't give you a quiz last week because I'm going to just give you one final quiz this week, and then we're done there. So, and I'll spend some time marking all the rest of them. But I just want to tell everybody be safe over the summer. Big up on yourself. Hopefully you read through the book. Here we are at chapter 11, the final and extremely eventful chapter of the book My Father, Son Johnson. As usual, we're going to start with a summary. So let me just go straight into that summary of chapter 11. And as you guys would have known, it has the appropriate title of My Father, Son Johnson, because it's basically wrapping up the story, and the main focus is Son, his life, and the overall impact that it has. So here's a summary for chapter 11. Debbie had her baby, and things were going well for Son. He had leased a piece of Mrs. Hilcher's land and was clearing it for planting, and he bought Jack Jegson's land. Debbie kept Jake at bay, and Brad and Arlene were now nice to their brother and father. Things were going very well. But then, one day, father received a premonition. Premonition just means a dream or a thought or something that he thinks is predicting the future. A premonition to go to Robin Hill. Robin Hill was on fire. Son saved Jake's life by pushing him out of a window, but Son died in the flames. Rami was partially catatonic until he woke up on the day of Son's funeral. So basically, he's been blacked out and can't believe what happened. He's not sure what is real and what isn't. All of Son's family and the Hilchers attended. Jake was conspicuously absent. It was really weird that he was absent. Reverend Ledbetter performed the service, and Rami was a pallbearer. Rami stopped the proceedings when he saw that Son was to be taken in a Cadillac hearse to be laid to rest on Robin Hill. He had a private discussion with his mother where he found out that Jake and Debbie had split up because Jake blamed Son for the fire. Rami requested that Son be buried in River Bottom because Robin Hill did not belong to the Johnsons anymore. Men ran ahead to dig a new grave for Son in River Bottom. Rami decided to forego school at 17, stay at River Bottom after a year, then move up to the village. He implies that he will marry Donneray because he invites his mother and siblings to live with him and Donneray in the village when he builds his house there, after the store starts to pay. So, unfortunately, what we'll find out is that Son dies in this fire, right, after he gets his premonition. And this is a very important part of the story because what we're seeing is the type of sacrifices that Son is willing to make. This sacrifice becomes a real turning point for Rami's life. And just so some of you guys know, the story itself doesn't end at this book, Son Johnson. There are two other books that follow, and I'll find out the names and tell you by next class. But for now, let's focus on this story. After working so hard to really build back his life, it's very unfortunate that Son dies at the end of the story. But it's a very deep message that shows us really the type of impact a life can have. Son, in essence, probably felt his life was complete enough that he had no fear actually running to save Jake, to save and fight for Ma's life, even though he wasn't married to her anymore. And this says a lot about Son's character, hence why this chapter and this novel is really named after Son. Let's go over some of the quotes that look at the setting because it becomes very important to look at the setting of the novel. I've been speaking about the importance of the setting on the characters and the themes, and now you find that the book itself, the novel itself, finishes with that type of important setting factor, which is they wanted to bury him at Robin Hill, but throughout this story, we realize that he has become connected to River Bottom. So the idea of burying him at Robin Hill, which he doesn't own, was almost offensive, and luckily, Rami was able to save that. Then we noticed that they wanted to take him off in a Cadillac hearse. And Rami was like, yo, he never drove in a hearse in his life. Why is he going to drive in one in his death? This isn't his style. This isn't like him. So they put him on a carriage and carried him down to river bottom where they dug a new grave. And what we realized too is that in his death, Ram ensured to respect his identity, respect who he was. And burying him in river bottom is very important because he becomes one with the ground. He becomes one with the land. The land that he worked on, the land that he built into his own identity. He becomes one with it. And that is why the setting is important, because the setting is not just an address, it's what that actual place meant. And the fact that they buried him in river bottom shows just how much it meant. The first quote at the start of chapter 11. Father had men working for him once more. They had cleared the rest of our hillside land and were having a good bash at part of the Hilcher farm which Father had leased. Father was putting in yams by the acres. He was not just doing it because the land was there. He had looked into the future, market forecasting I think they called it, and had decided that the demand would be right. No longer was this father of mine doing things by whims and impulses. He was back to his original form, which had rocketed him from poverty to Robin Hill. So, what we find important here is that they're speaking about him buying lands, him doing things. And this is a big step in his development, because this person who looked like he was down to his lowest now looks a little bit stronger. Now looks ready to take on the world. Sadly, he died. Now, that same thing, we saw Father, oh Father, he was a jack of all trades. Plunging into the bush with a man to help him. He had sawn up lumber, posts, sails, joists, rafters, and boards as he would need them. He was what Ma and Jake had quarreled about. Father was moving too close to him, dangerously close to Jake. So what we notice is that all this land that he was buying was giving him way more power as well. And that power was making him become an even bigger competitor to Jake. Another quote. Now, what we're finding here too in this quote, I appraised the blaze. There was no part of the building that was not ablaze now. The kitchen had already collapsed. The fire had likely started there. From the inside somewhere, something like a heavy beam crashed. What we're looking at when we're talking about setting now is how he describes the fire, how he describes where he is and what he's seeing, and how that fire eventually engulfs and kills Father Sonson Johnson. The last quotation that I'm going to look at, last two quotations, goes back to what we mentioned before. All the Johnsons before Father had been buried in a small enclosure at Robin Hill, some of them entombed. Let me explain. Robin Hill was not at the start a huge chunk of land. It was first a small tract which Father had inherited from grandfather and had added over the years by buying around him, so that a piece of Robin Hill was in the family for generations and our ancestors were entrenched there. But the house, the land, whose land now? So this is why we say setting becomes important, because the land represents identity, represents family, represents ownership. We will bury him at river bottom. Yes, son, do it. Do it for him. You know, we notice now that identity and personality becomes a big thing. The name of the novel is My Father Sonson Johnson, but it's a lot more than just naming it after Sonson. It's about the fact that all of these things represent a person. It represents growth. It represents fight. It represents struggle. And in the end, it's very sad that this struggle turns out to be not enough to save his life when things go bad. But what we look on is the growth of his character. We've been consistently talking about Sonson's growth. And his growth is really shown here when he goes and he saves Ma. I will talk more about that growth of character when we're going to characters, but I also want us to notice, where does he save Ma? Robin Hill. Somewhere that he has felt disconnected. Somewhere that he has not been in touch with. But at the end of the day, who he has become represents more than just the place. Sonson himself has become a better person. And that is why it is important to bury him where he became that better person, and that was River Bottom, right? It's also good to look at the fact that he wanted to expand, but that expansion is going to live through Rami, and we will talk about that in characters as well. Now that we've finished the novel, a few discussion questions. How do you feel about the events of the final chapter? How do you feel about Rami burying Sun Sun at River Bottom instead of Robin Hill? Should he have been buried at Robin Hill since Robin Hill was where Sun Sun lived at first? You know what I mean? Or should he be buried at River Bottom where Sun Sun's identity was really built? Let me know in the comments in Edmodo, and I guess you can comment on the YouTube video as well. But I see you guys next class. Ensure you're reading the book. Big up yourself. Oh, also, excited.